Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to discuss something I'm going to start calling reality shaming. If you're over 20 years old, then you've completed the majority of your basic education in this world. And during the course of that process, I'm sure you were told about the story of the emperor that had no clothing. It's one of the oldest fables. It is not as simple as it sounds. But for those of you who missed it, there is a parade where the king is, or the emperor, whatever. He is walking down the street of his subjects. His ego is on display. And a child is watching with his parents. And the child realizes that the king, or the emperor, has no clothing on. He is walking straight down the street, nude. And there are people standing around him, pretending to be holding part of his outfit with their hands, pacing behind him, holding his tails. And the little boy is confused because everyone else is acting like he has clothes on. And the little boy shouts out, "Mommy, Daddy, why doesn't he have any clothes on?" And then everyone does a huge gasp of whatever, offense, surprise, a little bit of reality from their Stockholm Syndrome. And then all of a sudden everyone can see the fact he doesn't have any clothes on. And I think it's interesting because that story was told to me as a kid and I had no motive to understand what the hell was going on. And now in my 40s I say, every single society gets there. Every single society gets to a point where everyone has their head shoved up their ass. Where they sit around in Stockholm Syndrome. And it really means that they've made a bunch of bad decisions in life. And instead of just acknowledging it and moving on and repairing their life, they double down on stupidity. Not just ignorance, but sheer selected stupidity. And for the few of us that are awake, in this day and age, at least we have the internet, so that little kid could go and write a blog and say, "I was just downtown, my fellow countrymen, our king doesn't have any clothes on ever. Everyone in downtown is pretending like he's dressed. We are fucked here. Come and please take this place over." That's sort of what's happening now, which is good. The modern first world countries of this planet are back inside that allegorical story. America, Poland, Iceland, Russia are a few of the countries that have decided not to go another round. We are countries that have said, yeah, no, go fuck yourself. But we have factions within each one of these countries, probably the worst one here in America, where the microscopic cesspool that is Antifa and similar groups funded by George Soros, MoveOn.org, who take ads out of newspapers to come and protest, who literally gather up in one location dressed in Nazi outfits and Antifa outfits, get on the same bus, go to the Charlottesville massacre thing, or whatever, the event that occurred, and they hop out of the bus together. One playing one side, one playing the other side, to make sure that the narrative of fakeness keeps going and going. To make sure that we fight, so that we will get all disrupted, and when the stock market crashes, they're going to blame it on some Civil War thing. Consumer lack of confidence or some bullshit. because they have no excuse to crash the economy right now. The subprime loan scandal was incubated as early as 2003, with Joe Biden leading the way, covering up the tracks and the trails of what the bankers were going to be held liable for. But before we get into specifics, let's just go back to this thing where people are wrong. People are really fucking wrong. But this is called shaming reality, right? Why did I call it that? Because this ridicule process is a tool of people like George Soros. It's a tool of feminists and misguided people. It's a tool of evil fuckers like Hillary Clinton. Ignorant human beings like Bernie Sanders. It is a tool for them to continue getting their way, really participating very little in what's going on. The ultimate job for a socialist is to get the job, get the paycheck, do nothing, and do whatever you want with the money. That's a Bernie Sanders, a guy that didn't get a fucking job until he was in his 40s. We have Jerry Brown here as a governor of California, another Democratic socialist, lives with his daddy most of the time. Lived with his daddy until he got into office. As soon as he got out of office, he went and moved back with his daddy. The guy is a fucktard of a person. It's going to be a nice cussy episode here. There's a bunch of kids out there, in America at least, with horrible educations, thus rendering them pretty much idiots. And I mean, scientifically speaking, their IQs are extremely low. The amount of information that has ever passed between their ears is very low. And the weird thing is they come from fairly wealthy families, or at least middle-class, strong families. And so the parents, having created these absolute idiots, are trying to pay off the mistake by subsidizing all of their kids' lives. And so they're out there able to protest, right? But they know virtually nothing. The average, 20-year-old in America today is either highly educated and on board with fixing the world, thus most of you guys who are in your 20s, or they're out there standing deer-eyed at a protest, and when asked why they're protesting, they have nothing. And I mentioned that first before going into the shaming part so that you understand why the shaming thing, which we're going to get into, is so popular today. And what's really fucking hilarious within these groups is that you have a group where, on one half of this unemployable, ignorant group of human beings, where you can't have an intelligent conversation with these people. They use the word like 5 times in one sentence. They end every statement with a question inflection. That is a pure sign of someone who is ignorant as a human being. You're illiterate. You don't understand how you're talking. You miss the boat when fucking brains are being handed out, right? But on one half of this group, and they always have these contradictory agendas because they're all part of doublespeak. They're all part of a cognitive dissonance thing. It's all about lying to yourself constantly. And like I warned everyone 2 years ago, once you start lying to yourself, and you got to watch my political correctness episode, once you allow in some doublespeak lies that you deep down inside know are bullshit, you have created a mechanism to be very dangerous within your own life. Talk about, being in a frustration dream where nothing makes any sense, but it's reality and you can't get out because everywhere you step and go, it's just more confusing and more destructive. That's the youth of today. Let me give you an example. You got a good portion of these sort of social justice warriors preaching about going vegan. Now, that's up to you, man. But on one level, you're to be losing a bunch of weight because you're probably very malnutritioned, to be honest. Only some folks know how to pull it off and stay healthy. But you're completely malnutritioned, and you're just nearly looking anorexic. We have these people in Huntington Beach and Southern California here that are recently on these fucking kicks. And the reason why they get on the kicks is because they got fat. And they realize when they eat nothing, they get thin, and they think thin is healthy. Now, some of them go to the gym. Some of them monitor their nutrients, and they actually can pull it off. But, I mean, it is a fucking full-time job to be a healthy vegan. I'm just telling you, right? I had 12 extreme years of exposure to this when living in the Bay Area. The very first month I lived there, my coworkers were, being fussy eaters. It was excruciatingly painful. But now, okay, so you're supposed to be vegan. That's the big new thing now. They want you to eat as much GMO fucking vegetables as possible. That's why this whole thing has a trend. On the other side, you're supposed to get fat. You're supposed to get fat. You're supposed to be a fat model. You're supposed to be a fat human being. And I don't just mean you're a thick person. There are people on this planet who are built to be thick. There are gorgeous women who are not necessarily overweight. They just are thicker people. They have bigger frames. That's just the way it works, And there's men that are exactly the same. And you wouldn't call them necessarily fat if you understood their biology. So there's a big difference between being fat and being a little bit thick. But being fat means that you have now accumulated more fat in your fat cells than you're supposed to have. Your fat cells inside your body will continue growing and growing from a microscopic level where you can barely see an individual fat cell to damn near, a quarter inch in diameter. I mean, it's unfucking believable. I talked to a bunch of plastic surgeons in my lifetime. I've got one in my family, and they tell you, look, you can deflate the fat cell, but the elasticity of the cell never really returns back to its tight shape. So when you do something to your body that actually is against the biological charter of your body, you are fucking up your body. Right? You want to be tough and badass and drink alcohol because you think fucking somebody cares? And you destroy your liver and you destroy your brain and you thin out your arteries and your veins, and you're doing it for some reason that is, ridiculous. You do it too often. You really fuck yourself up. I mean, you can do it. It's up to you, man, but don't blame us for acknowledging the fact it's occurring. So again, inside the social justice war, you're either going to have some gigantic fucking cartoon character yelling and screaming who's 150 pounds overweight. I mean, over any discernible level of your big boned, down to your absolutely emaciated person who can barely protest because they have virtually no energy. They're 22 years old and their skin looks like, an old paper bag from Radio Shack or a plastic bag from Radio Shack. They have no energy. They're docile. They're able to vote for people just because they don't have any energy to fucking think. Right? They don't have any aggressive gene against oppression. And they get the extra fluoride toothpaste, I always tell you guys, I come from a little hometown, right? The reason why I always mention that is that there's a different way to live in those towns. The nice thing about a little town in the Midwest is that we don't do a lot of bullshitting. Where do you think your humble narrator got his attitude from? We call a spade a spade. It's shit and it's shinola. The reason why communities that communicate well are typically pretty healthy folks is that we don't have the television and the news and some goddamn, racist party that claims to be against racism, a militant group of people that claim to not be militant and to be against militant people, coming in and providing the brochure to bullshit each other and ourselves, right? So no one infiltrates a little town and says, oh, this is how you bullshit yourself, okay? You know, when you see that woman who's 900 pounds, you just think of her as 90 pounds. That doesn't happen. People in the Midwest, it would be utterly hilarious to see what they would do to a person like that. Now, it does sneak in, right? Now, the other bummer is that everyone has a rite of passage, right? All the little kids have rite of passages, and typically rite of passage means, you know, fuck the police, which could be just your mother, your father, and so then you're trying to go against the grain, you're trying to piss off your parents, and unfortunately George Soros is right there with his, you know, child trafficking ring and his horrible agendas, right? And so your kid walks straight into the bus ticket to Rapeville, you know. If someone became extremely obese, and I'll just use this as an example, in my hometown, people would talk. And they wouldn't necessarily talk from a ridicule standpoint. They would talk from a standpoint of, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Is she okay? Is he okay? Are they taking medication and makes him swell up like Elvis before he died? And then people would step in and try and help. Because that's humanity, right? Right now, we have this really odd ability for a bunch of idiots to congregate. And they are trying to manipulate the rest of us with our heads firmly out of our asses by using the word shaming. You're shaming a person. When all these people are typically doing is just acknowledging it. That's all they're doing. Why does anyone change anything in life? Because they've decided they don't like the old way. Enough negativity gets associated with someone's weight that they lose weight. It's, you know, like a psychologist will always tell you, the individual has to choose it for themselves. In my experience, there's definitely some social normalities and norms that help me figure out what is going to be okay for me. It does help. But we are at a point now where we are, you know, well, I should say this. There's a group of folks that are very tiny, but they have all the fucking press in the world, which is just a big giant magnifying glass on a fucking tick of society, which makes them look a lot bigger. But they are trying to make it illegal, morally illegal, for you to acknowledge reality. They're trying to use tribalism to scare you into submission. I'm going to give you a real-world example here. We have a listener that recently was gang-stalked by Antifa. And I was fortunate enough to have them, he and his girlfriend reached out to me and we sort of talked it over. He had a job for 10 years. He's in Omaha, Nebraska. Antifa got a hold of him. They don't know who the hell he is. They just have a bunch of stupid incidental information about the guy. But they took every single event of his life and just twisted it in some blog. Someone at his work, I guess, was notified of this or was a part of this. It sort of makes me feel like the guy that was at his work, it's just a hunch, may have been involved with these assholes. It's just like the fucking Inquisition, people. And we're going to review that little nightmare so you understand why Antifa has to be wiped off the face of the fucking planet. I don't know what's worse, a Muslim terrorist or an Antifa member. Because they're fucking with the fabric of your reality. And if you don't realize that, then listen up, folks. Listen up. Because you have a bunch of misguided motherfuckers messing with people's lives. So this poor guy has had a job for 10 years. Some prick at his business ran to the boss with this information. Sounds like the asshole involved, right? And gets him fired. Now, the employer did not do any investigation. The employer simply took an accusation through a third party and fired this guy. Talk about a bunch of assholes. Now, I should be a little more lenient because maybe they hire him back, but they fired him after 10 goddamn years. He doesn't get any questioning. He doesn't get any chance to tell his side of the story. There is a reason why we have rights in court. There's a reason why we have the right to legal representation. Because without it, the world immediately sucks. The world returns to law of the jungle, whoever has the biggest stick, right? And that's where you're going if you let these fucktards remotely influence the way we live our lives. Now, I was also told that the guy that went and told on him, little tattletale bitch that he was, he also got fired too. So the company just basically said, we're getting rid of both of you. We're not going to listen to your case. And so then, boom, boom, clean your hands. The legality of the whole thing is over. Can you believe that? Can you believe that that would ever happen anywhere after a person's been on board for 10 years? You want to shame somebody, shame the fuck out of this place. Obviously, I can't mention who they are because then we get into problems. But it didn't stop there. He went off to another employer who he had worked for previously and had been kind of part-timing with because there's plenty of room in his schedule for it. Gets hired within 4 hours, starts right back up again. Everything's fine. Somehow, again, there must be an insider is all I could think. Somehow, the story leaked over to the new people. And they gave him a call and said, you don't have to come into work. We don't really know if they're going to actually completely terminate him on the second job. But look at the fucking lunacy of this situation. One of the most fucked things when I was a kid, and we're just going to let this one roll today, is that when I was a kid in junior high and high school, they had this policy that if you got in a fight, you were suspended. Sounds good, right? Except that the poor bastard who gets picked on, the innocent guy that didn't do a goddamn thing but stand outside while the teachers weren't paying attention to the retarded bully, he gets clocked in the face, and he gets suspended too. Oh yeah, maybe the kid who did it gets 7 days, but the kid who gets punched in the face gets 3 days. With all the penalties of not being able to go to class, to being stigmatized as some delinquent. It goes in the kid's permanent record until he graduates high school. A bunch of teachers go, oh, yeah, be careful, that guy, he always gets in fights. It's like, no, he doesn't. He stands there innocently, and being the kid who walked into several different schools, I personally had to deal with this crap. And you had to take the fight around the corner so that nobody would, so you wouldn't get suspended, just to defend yourself against some asshole, right? And we had a kid that I talked about in one of the episodes. He was mentally abused as a kid. He could bench press 240 pounds in 8th grade, all right? He was a big motherfucker, and he was just mentally damaged. He was mentally tortured as a child. He eventually hung himself at some juvie hall, which probably means someone killed him. But he just hated being in his own body, I guess, if he did kill himself. But they just set him loose on us. Well, everyone gets suspended if this kid fights, right? So that's what's going on with this whole shaming game. It's a technique for people to make you submissive. Remember when we did the being offended episode? There's a difference between being angry and being offended. Children who are fucking manipulative, they get offended because mommy and daddy teach them that if you can cry heavy enough, then you get to extort behavior out of other people. Right? Being offended, which is what the whole social justice warrior Antifa movement's all about. These weak little pussies who show up in their cloaked fucking, outfits and stuff, right? But they're trying to teach us all to be so fragile so they can manipulate you for free. For absolutely free. I had one of my partners tell me once, he goes, there's a few factions in the world that believe that the best deal that you could ever make is the one where you get everything for free. And you use guilt as the mechanism to get things for free. If you study history and you think about that algorithm, you will know who I'm talking about. They guilt trip part of society to give them something for free based on usually a shit ton of lies. And that massive algorithm is being used on a micro level inside society. Now let's flip over to the other side very, very quickly here. What am I saying? Am I saying that everybody should be offensive and just speak their mind constantly? And when you happen to walk in line at the grocery store and someone in front of you is 200 pounds overweight, you're not supposed to, are we saying that they should be able to say whatever they want to say? God, you're fat. What the hell's wrong with you? What do you eat? Blah, blah, blah. No. All right? But what I have noticed is that there are several examples where individuals are simply just saying in a conservative way, just acknowledging a person's attributes. It's so bad that if someone is a homosexual and someone else mentions in the conversation that they're homosexual, then all of a sudden this red, alarm goes off. You can't mention the fact he's a homosexual. You're like, why? He doesn't really have any problem with it. That's who he is, or that's who she is. Right? I had one of my friends who's a black guy. He was talking about the problem with conversations because he was out with his family and he was trying to identify where he was in the crowd. He's on his cell phone. And he brought it up that, there's been a bunch of debate about whether or not you should ever say a person's color, which isn't really black, of course, but someone's color to signify who you were talking to in a group of people. So if you had a white guy and a black guy and you want to tell a third party who you were talking to in this crowd, you could say, say they're the same height, they're the same build, maybe they even have the same damn name. 2 Bills or whatever, right? But you're trying to make sure that the person understands. And he was saying, at first there was a point in his life where he got frustrated that someone would say the black guy or the white guy. I was talking to this black guy, and he's like, "Why you gotta say it's black? Why do you say a person's black? Just say you're talking to a guy." So he lived a few years like that, probably half a decade, trying to police the race. And then he said he caught himself with his own family speeding things up in a crowd, like a Disneyland crowd, by saying, I'm over by the Mexican guy, I'm over by the white guy with the red shirt, da-da-da. And he was using colors, obviously, to create better symbolism for the brain to locate him in the park. And he finally gave up on the whole notion that he should be rolling around in some PTA police outfit trying to make everyone wrong all the time. And then he reflected back on the 70s when we all got along, man, right? We had, Richard Pryor helping us all sort of exhaust our cultural differences and laugh with each other, not at each other, right? The whole world is based on a bunch of principles, which essentially says, leave me the fuck alone and I'll leave you alone. That's what the world is built on. That's common law. Do no harm is the friendlier way to say it. But what are we allowing to occur? We are allowing complete lunacy to occur on a daily basis now, right? We're always looking the other way, constantly. Look at Europe. There's a guy. Now I want you to imagine the European Muslim invasion, right? Because they're not part of the EU, right? The Middle East is not part of the EU. They do not have passports that say, come on in, we're all one family. These are immigrants. They're moving through borders illegally, claiming heritage that is 96% inaccurate, right? Only 4% of these folks are from Syria. It's usually military males bringing a form of belief system, which is only a few 100 years old, maybe a little over 1,000 years old or whatever, but it has an intellect that is thousands and thousands of years in the past, where, like Milo says, the women are persecuted. It takes 2 women to make an opinion of a man if you're lucky. The women are castrated. The homosexuals are stoned to death. I mean, it is an unbelievable thing. 80-year-old men can have sex with girls of any age. Of any fucking age. And yeah, it goes right back to being basically a female who is alive as a baby is fodder for this group. If you want it, you can have it. So freeze that in your head. There's a video that's gone viral all over the internet, and it has a gentleman at a presentation. Most of you have seen this. He has these cylinders of bubble gum. And the bubble gum represents a quantitative unit of the population of this world. And in this thing, he's got, the United States, all of Europe, and then everybody else, all these third world countries, right? Australia must be somewhere in there. And he says, let's take, I think one of these is like 1 million people or something like that. And he goes, the lunacy that Europe and America and Australia can absorb the world's population that is living in abject poverty is utter lunacy. And he starts moving marbles, and he starts moving, 10 times the amount of people that we've actually migrated into Europe already. Then he moves 100 times the people into Europe, and you realize that more than 80% of the world's population is still sitting in these canisters. So he proves beyond the shadow of a doubt, right in front of your face, that we cannot absorb all the third world poverty into the first world realm. We have to go and help them fix their world where they are. And yet you have people in Europe. This is amazing. I've got dozens of stories at this point. 1 degree away from the individual who went over and experienced it for themselves, from people that can who live in America that can pass for foreigners from other countries because they're not natively American, which is a great way to get an infiltrator in there because they think they're talking to someone from China. They think they're talking to someone from Canada or India, but they're American citizens. And so all this kind of hatred for America comes just spewing out. But I've got it from ultra millionaires down to normal people going over and hearing all these backdoor conversations about what a bunch of assholes we are in America. Now, once you see this guy's demonstration of the marbles, which I'll try to link down below, you know that the people in Europe are completely full of shit. They are literally subsidizing individuals that will never integrate into their society. In fact, they outwardly preach. If there's one thing I totally respect about all of these Arabs moving into Europe, is that they're at least telling you the truth about what they're going to do. I kind of like that. They're like, we're getting rid of all of you. We're getting rid of you racially, and we're getting rid of you genetically. You're going away. And we're going to change any one of you who manages to survive, which we're not intending on letting any of you live. You're going to have to obey Sharia law. Hey, at least they're helping you, know thy enemy. It's just a doctrine difference, right? But somehow, Europe, who has been bred to be serfs, right? The interesting thing about the formation of America, and please forgive me because I know there's a lot of Europeans that are like, we are not with them, fuck this, we're different. Well, then we're on the same page, right? I don't think anybody would believe different than the overall arc of the show in general would be listening. But the people that had the total disgust and aggression to escape oppression moved to America. They said, I can't be ruled by a monarchy, and I can't be ruled by ignorance and indoctrination. Now, they get on a boat and they come over here, and they realize that there's more, different forms of indoctrination over here in America, so they don't completely escape. But overall, they don't have any king and queen on their fucking money over here, man. We have presidents that we honor because they helped put this place together. They suffered the slings and arrows of all craziness, fighting wars and what have you. And some of them were shills. Some of them were double agents like Benjamin Franklin. But what that did was that left behind the folks that were okay with Prussian education, with oppression. They were able to always rationalize away being oppressed. And then that genetic strand over there concentrated by inbreeding with itself to the point where each generation after is more docile than the next, right? And to get to the point where you living in some THX 1138 world, but you just wear normal clothing. The fact that Germany was at a point in the 30s where they wouldn't take shit from anyone, and they rose up and they created this crazy army and did all this crazy stuff. But today they're absolutely the epitome of bending over for crazy. Merkel, of all people, an East German fucking communist, runs the goddamn EU. Unbelievable that could ever happen, right? I mean, you take whatever repression you thought you had from a monarchy, and you look at the EU on top of this thing, it has bankrupted every fucking country in Europe. Germany's bankrupt, Spain is bankrupt, France is bankrupt, Italy's bankrupt. Greece was already bankrupt, right? Now they're trying to punish, England for getting out of the EU through Brexit. Unbelievable. It's an IQ test, all right? It's an IQ test to see if you have the wherewithal to maintain your identity as a human being. I forgot who said it, but someone said, I think Gandhi had repeated this line, but I'm sure he didn't write it, but the truth is the truth whether you like it or not. And that is the Occam's Razor mantra that I think that all of humanity should be into. In my family, on my surname side of the family, we kept it real. And there's no way this could easily happen, but if you were to become an alcoholic, or if you were to get obese or be a jerk or whatever, you're doing something stupid. It was the dinner table. It could be Thanksgiving dinner, and it's all coming out to make you realize, look, our surname means something. We don't do this, we do this. That's easy, right? Eating pies every day and gaining weight, that's easy. Not eating the pie and going and exercising and reading a book to become intelligent, that's hard, and that's what we do. There's nothing more energizing in the world than making yourself an amazing human being. If you have the wherewithal to create offspring and teach them well what made you what you are, that's another beautiful thing that occurs in the universe, is to create better people. So I love seeing really good-looking couples, and I don't necessarily mean cosmetically good-looking, but really good couples that seem to get along and just love each other properly. There's a good balance. Hey, nothing's perfect, but overall, even when they hit an obstacle, they recover well. I love those couples. I love seeing them. And I just think, make kids, man. Make babies. We need more people. Make sure you pass on how you got there. A lot of times those couples will create kids and just don't know how they got where they are. But once you pay attention to how you got where you are, you can pass it to another human being. So I saw a series of YouTube videos that my friend was playing yesterday. And it was people going down to Antifa rallies before the election was complete, I think, and even after it was complete. And all these people are standing in, lines and protesting, and then these people would walk up to him and say, "Why are you protesting?" And it was like half of them didn't know how to talk, which I think is funny, right? That one little brain cell in their head is just exhausted from overtaxation of standing in line. And then the kids that would pipe up and really try to say something, you would discover in 5 seconds that these kids who are running their mouth are the dumbest motherfuckers that the world has ever made. And you can tell they've come from families with money, because obviously they don't have any jobs, right? If they have college educations, I don't know what janitor's closet they hid in the entire time, but they missed it. When asked why they hated Donald Trump, nothing, just propaganda. No facts about anything. Just every little soundbite, every accusation without any conclusion. They just kept stringing it all together. And when you remind them that those are all bullshit pieces of propaganda that completely fizzled out, even in the mainstream press it fizzled out, oh boy, then you've hurt their feelings, because you've said that the emperor has no clothing, and they keep trying to say he does. And they're stuck in a Stockholm Syndrome where they have been held captive by their ignorant brains. And they don't want to go off and learn. They've already got their $100,000 worth of debt from college. They came out with no ability to be employed. And they are pissed. And they should be pissed. But instead of yelling at other humans that are just trying to live a good life and trying to, bring back some goddamn jobs to this country and get rid of Common Core education and take care of veterans and everything else that's good that's going on in this country right now, they're trying to attack everyone who's trying to help instead of going back into the educational institutions and saying, you robbed me. You're propped up as my hero, as the educational college or whatever that took my money, and what I got was shit. How can you create a degree, for instance, in a art that doesn't employ? Right? You have some. I met a woman once that had a PhD in Chicano studies, but she worked in HR because there's no job for that. You can only go out and reteach it. Well, if you're doing a cultural curriculum, then it's time sensitive because the world of Chicanos in the 2000s is different than it was in the 20th century versus the 21st century versus the 18th century, 19th century, whatever, right? So what you have is got an expiration date on it immediately. So now what are you doing? Teaching Chicano history? But these kids get whatever degree they can because they also don't go to college. By the time they get to college, they have such low GPAs because the Common Core thing left them, sucking air, that they can't qualify or pass a normal employable trade skill. And because working in general has been deprecated out of society because staring at telephones is the most mind-taxing experience of a youthful person today, when it says, no, you got to really concentrate to get a job. You got to concentrate to keep the job. Whatever you're doing, it takes more than 10 minutes to complete a real job, a real trade skill. Like I've said in several episodes, the world has been run by a bunch of fucking children for a really long time. And the only parent in the previous domain of the world have been banker parents. People who are interested in pure control. And so they get a bunch of, disenfranchised people. And they get them all exacerbated. They give them a paycheck to backstab humanity. And you get a Hillary Clinton. Right? The fat, nerdy girl who's smart, but just loathes society because she was never accepted. And so her whole sociopathic arc in life is to get back at society. There's 2 or 3 Secret Service books about her. And the one telling thing about Hillary Clinton is that they said that a lot of Secret Service people would say, good morning, Madam Clinton, whatever the fuck they say, and she would say, oh, go fuck yourself. It was like a daily ritual. And she was just disrespectful as it could possibly be to the people that are there to save her life. And all I can say is, wow. Have you ever done something so disgusting in your life? Someone showing you respect, someone is actually responsible for saving your life, and you take it to 11, right? You are so utterly disrespectful to that person that why would they possibly help you stay alive? By the way, that little clicking noise, chirping noise in the background is a hummingbird doing his thing. It sounds like a video game. It sounds like a little, some sort of asteroids video game. So what do we do? What do we do about this whole thing? Well, the first thing I want to remind you is let's keep some perspective here. The individuals who are gang stalking are actually breaking the law. So at some point, they're going to cross lines and there's going to be federal marshals on their doorsteps. It will happen. And they're going to be hauled away in handcuffs just like people who have check fraud because they're engaging in slander And luckily, for them, they're picking on people that are understanding more than they are. But eventually they're going to fuck with someone who's got money, technique, big-ass attorneys, and again, they're all going to get served papers. And they're all going to go to jail. And they're all going to be felons. And they're all going to lose their right to vote. And so it won't matter how their opinions differ. They're going to be extracted from the society that actually knows how to get along. If you had 350 million people in the United States of America, I'm willing to bet you have less than 1 million people who are part of these groups who have the ability to protest and still pay their electricity bill. Like a lot of these people live with mommy and daddy. So a couple of years from now, they're going to have to get kicked out of their house, most likely. And they're going to have to get jobs. And this shit's going to seem really old. Anyone who sits there and complains and complains and complains, eventually, no matter if they're right or not, society says, shut the fuck up, would you? We're sick and tired of your bullshit. There's assholes that just complain, and there's people who actually try to fix things. But when you're completely misinformed about how the world works and what is actually going wrong, you can't deal with an issue. You just go on personal attacks constantly. That's all that's going on in this country. If you want to change the world, run for office, asshole. Go run for office and change things. Just do city council stuff first and move yourself up to state level position, become a congressman or a House of Representative, and eventually you'll be able to change the world. But they don't have the IQ to pull it off. And that's the funny thing. They are stuck with a glass ceiling they can't see. And it's going to be a glass ceiling that keeps them from getting employed as well. And that's why they have all the time in the world to harass people with jobs. But we're going to have to intellectually fight back against these douchebags. We're going to have to say, look, you've got the unemployed, ignorant human beings of the world sitting online, gang stalking the intelligent, employed people of the world, and we have to make sure that any corporation or private employer that falls for this shit and punishes the person with an employable trade skill to appease those that are sucking socialism, welfare, that's the game, that you can't do that. Or we won't shop at your fucking place. All right? I think the employer who let go our listener, I think we should do whatever we can to make sure there's no business going to that place until they reverse their stance on it. Because they are showing that they're a corporation without a single iota of humanity. They're not willing to investigate the facts. And hey, I talked to this listener and, he said, look, even if they could make a case, I'd feel a lot better getting fired if they could talk to me, right? Do you want children to run this fucking planet? Is that what you want? Right? Obviously, it's a rhetorical question for anyone listening to this particular show. But just in case it hasn't crossed your mind, let's get very black and white with it. Do you want children making policies about when you go to bed, what food you should eat, what constitutes a job? I'm very close to the entertainment industry. I mean, I'm in it. But there's all of this talk, just to give you a metaphorical example of how bad the world could get. People aren't going to movies anymore. The studios have utterly replaced people with film degrees with executives that have no film degree. And because executives can have God complexes from previous employment, or they're just these uppity Ivy League folks, it's not everywhere, but there's enough of it, it's fucking up Hollywood. We can't get a good movie out of any studio. And it's because at that level, at the tippy top level, they're not allowed, anyone who knows what the fuck they're doing is not allowed to tell the executive at the studio, this script sucks. This movie sucks. Oh yeah, your special effects? Well, of course you're going to be able to buy a bunch of explosions, right? But this film sucks. Don't make it yet. We can make it great. We need to rewrite the script maybe 50 times. Whatever it takes. But this totally sucks. Don't greenlight this. And then you might find a script that's great, that takes a risk, right? And the studios are saying that they are keeping Hollywood alive by not taking risks, by remaking every old movie, right? Making a sequel to everything that's out there, right? And they're playing games with our loyalties, right? Those of you who are Star Wars fans, how much did you like Star Wars Awakening or Star Wars Awakens? It was a shit film. You know, they played the minority card right in front of your fucking face, right? The black guy was a fucking janitor, right? He couldn't possibly be an intelligent human being with a commander's responsibility, with some, prestigious career equal to his white counterparts on the movie. He was a janitor. And that was a big joke, that the black guy was a janitor. Isn't that unbelievable? It just went right under the radar. No one complained about it at all. But when Jar Jar Binks sounded like a Sambo, everyone went fucking crazy, which they should have. Those first 3 Star Wars they remade in the 90s, you got racial stereotypes as every single accent to an alien, right? The little guy that flew around the mechanic's shop, he was the Italian, he talked like this, and then it was the tall, thin aliens at the end. Oh, they were like Asian people, oh yeah, because that wasn't totally fucking offensive, right? Whatever happened to Star Wars invented languages that sounded like fucking aliens? Whatever happened to that? So, let me continue with the analogy before I get all emotional about that. But the thing is that Hollywood can't make a great film on average. Now, there are ones that slip through, obviously, which we like. But no one's going to those movies anymore. The theaters have actually, I think, done an incredible job upgrading the experience, where you have assigned seating, you have people that bring concession out to you. There's now people watching the audiences throughout the production, so when you're throughout the viewing process, so if somebody's making a bunch of damn noise, they come up and tell them to shut the hell up. That's awesome. I've actually had some pretty good experiences over the last couple of years. But I can't find a reason to pay these exorbitant prices, $50 for 2 or 3 people to go to the movie theater, and the movie sucks and you can't get your money back. It's like eating the whole meal and going, well, this really was bland. Well, tough shit, you ate it all. The reason why Hollywood's dying is because of the emperor has no clothes on algorithm. People are so high and mighty that you can't tell them the truth. And they're just the kind of schmucks that don't want to be told the truth. There's always that, if you have any integrity in your life, there's always that moment when you meet someone within your family, within your circle of friends, that just simply can't hear the truth. All right, I got some friends that are, they've known each other longer than I've known them. And from time to time, one guy gets in the shithouse, right? One guy did something that puts him in the shithouse. And, sometimes you can agree, but sometimes it's completely unfounded. And so I'm sitting in the room, and they're bad-mouthing the guy that's not in the room. And I happen to know the guy that they're bad-mouthing. I know all of the facts of what went on. And when I try to represent this guy, because he's not there, which I don't do very often, the people that are wrong, the people who are lying, say, well, we just can't talk about this. I just can't talk about this. It's just, I get so emotional, I just can't talk. We just shouldn't talk about this. We're going to get a big argument if we talk about this. Basically saying, I'm going to throw a fucking tantrum like a child if you so much as start counteracting my bullshit take on another human being, my lies about another human being, which don't make any logical sense. It's like if you do the logic loop of what they're claiming, the pieces and parts cannot fit together. So you've got a liar in the room, right? But they bully you out of debate. Now, one of the distinctions about the protests that are going on is that I see videos like I did yesterday, and these kids are like 18 to 24, somewhere in there. And so that if you're an adult, you know jack shit when you're that young. I mean, you know fucking nothing about the world. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're not informed. You haven't lived enough life to research this stuff. In most cases, for those that are awake at that age, man, they are gifted prodigy children. They really are, and we should celebrate their tenacity. But during the presidential election here in America, all last year and the beginning of this year, I had people in their 70s. Every single age, from 70 down to 20. carrying utter propaganda, like bold-faced propaganda, like ridiculous cartoon versions of reality, when countered with facts. And some of this is not very acidic stuff. Some of this is just the most basic stuff. How the world works. Who runs this fucking place, right? I would get shut down by statements like, well, none of that matters. It was the most common statement I heard. None of that matters. The facts don't matter. I personally don't like daddy. And Trump is daddy. Trump walks in the room and says, knock that shit off, would you? What do you mean we don't take care of our veterans? You mean to tell me, the sales pitch to get in the army is to serve your country and have all this fucking, patriotic thought process to go kill people you have no fucking idea who they are? There's no difference between going to the Middle East and killing people and going to Vietnam and killing people. You don't know. We didn't know who those people were in Vietnam. They hadn't done anything to us. The Gulf of Tonkin, events were all fake. And now we orchestrate this 9/11 thing and run over and kill a bunch of people over there for business, for the integrity of our U.S. dollar, right? And so let's say they buy into all that patriotic. You must sacrifice yourself for your country. And then these guys get messed up. They get PTSD. They have actual physical events that maim them, that take away their limbs, that burn them, or all the above. And they come back here. They ask for a socialistic form of help. Like, help me. I just sacrificed my life, my ability to walk without crutches or a wheelchair. People have been burned in their face. Think about it, man. After they heal, they look in the mirror and the person that they were their whole life is gone. Physically speaking, right? The inside, obviously, they're still the same person, but they have to give up the fact that they don't look like the way they looked before. Is there anything more fucking horrific than that? And don't you think we could do something good for those people? So every kid out there saying some fucking Antifa line is basically telling that soldier, go fuck yourself. You were stupid for getting into war, so fuck you. Stay maimed. Suffer. You know what? And faster you can kill yourself, the better. Because not taking care of a PTSD soldier is basically playing Russian roulette with their ability to stay alive. And a lot of these men and women are married, they have children, they have responsibilities, but you know what? Above all, they have the right to be under common law and have no harm done to them. Now, obviously, the war drew them into some horrible things sometimes. But sometimes a soldier doesn't kill anybody. They're just there. And they get hurt. So here comes a responsible adult. For the first time in God knows how many hundreds of years since this country was put together, he takes care with people who are devoting their entire lives to this. They take care of these soldiers. But he's an asshole, right? There's a ton of this going on. I now know why the social justice warriors don't want Obamacare to go away. Because they're all going to die of cancer. All of them. Every fucking one of them is going to die of cancer if they don't pull their head out of their ass, because they're living in these giant hate bubbles. And hate breeds cancer. So of course they're going to need socialistic health care. But cancer is the one thing that's incredibly expensive that health insurance companies do not want to insure. I was involved in a software company in the Bay Area. We had 75 employees here in America. It was actually a British founded company. And in the first 2.5 years I worked for them, we went through probably 3 or 4 different health policies. And every time you're at a company and they change health policies, you get the big giant booklet of where you find your doctor, how to do all this stuff. And they kept just giving this to us and giving us. I was like, Jesus, what's going on? And they said, well, here's the problem. The senior VP of sales, who's a female, had a husband that was dying of cancer. And the insurance policies kept canceling our entire company policy due to this guy's bills. When I guarantee you 75 people, because it was her external husband that wasn't part of the count, all of our premiums would have easily paid for everyone's little tiny, antibiotic visit, but also would have paid that guy's monthly premium in a heartbeat. They weren't losing any money. They were making money off our company. But it just fell below the margin. Or they didn't want to get him all the way to his death because maybe they thought his bills were going to, accelerate and go up in price. But we went through at least 3 policies. And finally, she was told, you cannot bring your husband on this insurance policy. You can have yourself and your kids, but you can't bring your husband on. And those companies wrote Obamacare. But if you try to acknowledge reality, well, then you're a bad person, right? There are organizations out there which make all of their money by being scumbags, right? Tabloids. Tabloids are funded and allowed to do what they do by the governments that should shut them down for harassing human beings. But they're allowed to exist because they are to keep the control on the talent that gets wealthy. Now, again, there's no reason why you should listen to an actor tell you how to vote. You shouldn't listen to just, musicians and famous people simply because they're someone that you enjoy their byproduct of what they do, right? You should make decisions for yourself. I was watching this little documentary on George Michael. I think I mentioned doing this in a previous episode I haven't aired yet. And it was the whole scandal of him being at the Beverly Hills Hotel, going down to this park, being in some, some public bathroom, and he gets busted by a cop for trying to do something in stalls. And, the cop solicited sex, he agreed, and then he gets busted. It was total entrapment. And the tabloid ran a headline that said, "Zip me up before you go." Exposing for the very first time what a lot of people suspected was that George Michael was a homosexual. And then in the interview, they're interviewing the chief editor of whichever tabloid, I think it was the Inquirer or something like that wrote that headline. And this guy was utterly shameless, right? He could care less about the utter chaos and destruction he did to George Michael's career, his public image, pulling out a personal thing. Now, of course, there's all kinds of legal stipulations that someone could debate to say that once you do something in public and you get busted by the cops, it's a matter of public record. True, right? But when Prince, the musician, had a child with Maite, the child lived about 40 days or so and passed away. And once the child passes away, that becomes a matter of public record. You can't hide the fact that his son, Prince Rogers Nelson, and I forgot his wife's real name, Maite, whenever this child dies, it becomes a matter of public record. Now, a lot of people have no idea that he had a child and that it died of a horrible condition where it never developed cartilage in its body. So the entire bone structure of the child was fused. But the Inquirer left him alone. The Sun left him alone. All of these tabloid agencies left him alone. And it happened while the internet existed. It was fairly early in the internet's history. But they left him alone because there was a certain level of dignity and respect they had for Prince. But, and it's a child. It's obviously a much innocent, it's a horrible tragedy due to just some anomalies that occurred. And George Michael's out there being the bad homosexual. Right? So he deserves to be dragged up and down the thoroughfare with a scarlet letter around his neck, right? Those organizations still exist. The organizations that have, I guess you could say, gay-shamed, still exist. But now they flip the script because they are used as tools to carve up the minds of anyone who's gullible enough to read them. And there's all this social pressure from all different areas to essentially be penalized if you were to acknowledge reality in any way, shape, or form. Respectfully acknowledge it or be a jerk about it. Jerks always make themselves isolated in this world. They do. And you don't have to say a damn thing. For everyone who's concerned about Donald Trump being, very boisterous, and in their brains that he doesn't act like a president because he's not getting Nobel Peace Prizes for doing fucking nothing. He doesn't lie about science related to climate change. Whatever. If you think he's that bad, and you're so certain he's that bad, let him hang himself. The best thing you can ever do with anyone who's acting like a dick in your life, or perhaps maybe engaging in sort of the precursor to trying to betray you, is to acknowledge what they might be doing and give them as much rope as possible. Because it is best that you get out of that mechanism of their influence on your life as quickly as possible before they destroy you. When I'm in business deals with folks and anyone starts acting what I think might be a little nefarious, I think they're going to start asking for a disproportional amount of the shares, of not necessarily stock shares, but just a share of the money or whatever. Instead of fighting them, I might make a few clarifying statements to them and kind of make sure that we're all on the same page of what they're asking for. And then I just give them as much rope as possible until they utterly choke on the shit. And until what they're trying to hide becomes utterly and completely exposed in front of everybody. And then they learn a big lesson, usually, right? Now, it's your option at the end of that exercise to give them a big hug and say, okay, that was your old way of doing it. Now I want you to try my way. My way is we divvy this shit up evenly. We keep it all above board. And, half the time I can usually get someone to understand that it was just a previous thought process that they had that was a little too greedy, that put them in this, this is my chance to really take it all. Take everyone else's money, take everyone else's credit for something. But people who are jerks always isolate themselves. Always. It's almost as if your attitude towards others is a karmatic frequency of existence. But let me throw something at you at the same time. We're on that subject. For those of you who are like me, and you considered yourself, the classification of you, I should say. You don't really consider yourself, but the classification you got in school was a mutt. I never spent, it was like towards the last part of my high school years, I was there long enough that people said, he's a familiar face, and, he's cool, and we do these things with him, and he's always got something trick up his sleeve, something he's surprising us with that we like. And so I did well probably the last 2 years of my high school life, but up until that point, if I moved to Massachusetts, I wasn't Jewish or Irish, so I was this weird racial mutt. I was like, who the fuck are you? You're not one of us. And some people warm up to me for a little while and then de-warm up or whatever, walk away. It was weird. Some people had integrity the entire time, but I remember I had a couple black friends in Massachusetts, and we kind of stuck together because we're like, look at these people. They're fighting constantly. The Jews and the Irish are pounding each other in the face every day after school. And we'd have to get involved just to get home, It's crazy. But we were kind of in this mutt world, right? What I want to mention about this mutt thing is that if you've been involved with that, or if you've grown up out of whatever clique you were in and you don't consider yourself a mutt, but you know those folks, as the years go by, especially if you go to your high school reunions or at least use Facebook to maintain connections with folks, you'll understand that the folks that were ostracized at times turned out to be some of the coolest people you've ever met in your life, and a lot of times the most successful people out of the entire school system. And you start to rethink what we were as children was not healthy. It wasn't based on facts. It was based on emotions. It was based on exclusivity and tribalism. For everyone who wants the world to be a utopia, which quite frankly I think most people do, besides maybe Luciferian people that are looking to make the world burn, like George Soros. It's funny that if an Antifa person understood what George is trying to do to the world, they would realize that they're being manipulated by the wizard from hell. It's really interesting. But knowing people that are older who act like these children, it's a real confusing situation where you say to yourself, how did you get so old and remain so stupid? I mean, it's beyond ignorant, right? When you reach a certain age, I mean, honestly speaking, if you get to 40 years old and you're still hanging on to dogma, the label of, oh, we feel sorry for you because you're ignorant, no one's ever taught you what's right, becomes stupidity very quickly. You are now choosing to remain uninformed because you're weak. It's really usually what it comes down to is you're weak, you're lazy. But let me give you a caveat to that to be slightly more understanding of some folks. I am now completely certain, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that there is an age. It's different for every single person, okay? There is an age where, depending on how you toxify yourself, and I've got friends that are in their 80s who are completely lucid and just sharp as a nail, totally awake. And I mean, everything we talk about on this show and all those conspiracies, they know it. They have researched it and they believe it, and they don't believe the bullshit. They believe the real stuff. And where they don't know, they say they don't know. So they're just like us, and they're 80s. But I know people that are younger than that are over 60. They are starting to forget what they have learned in their life. And so they begin struggling with life. And we are to have pity on this situation. We are to be empathetic to their biological regression because it happens. It's probably due to alcoholism, might be due to drugs, might be due to just simply getting old. But another thing occurs. One, they're forgetting what they learned. So something that they were good at, they have to struggle to remember how to do it. It's like one of those things where it's what they say, it's just like riding a bike. You get back on the bike and you know how to do it. I haven't ridden a bicycle. I don't even know how many years. It's been decades. But I guarantee if I get on one, I'm going to be able to ride it. But the second thing that happens with age is that you can no longer learn new things. And this is probably, I don't know, within 5 years of exiting the world, to be honest. Now, there's also, obviously, we know health issues that occur. Bones and joints start to ache. That's pretty black and white, right? If your knee starts hurting or your hip starts hurting or something, well, that's just black and white. That's just, you got to take care of that shit, right? Luckily, modern medicine fixes those things very quickly. But there becomes a point where you can no longer learn new things. You might learn it for a really short period of time and keep it in your head. But if you go to bed, your computer reboots when you go to bed. Whatever was in your consciousness is going away for the evening. When you wake up, you're disoriented and you get reoriented and you kind of get your bearings together. Oh, yeah, I got to go to that meeting. Oh, shit, what am I going to talk about? Oh, that thing, right? There's a point where you lose the ability to do that. I mention that to you because a lot of times as a young person, you confide in folks that are older, and you try to seek wisdom from older folks. In most cases, I think that works beautifully. Unfortunately, I think that the youth of this world, well, I'll put it this way. My age, late 40s, you have my grandparents knew shit. They went through the Depression. At least one set of them did. And when I asked them, or asked my grandmother at least, from that era, what's life about, etc., etc., her answers were always extremely simple and beautiful and to the heart of humanity. If you're in your 20s, you're dealing with me as your parents. If you're in your 30s, you kind of have a younger sort of baby boomer parent. I have baby boomer parents, right? And they were the first group to unfortunately get indoctrinated, to get had. A lot of these people still think Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK. They still think credit cards are real money or fake money, right? Fake money you don't have to pay back. Some of them are strung out on buying new shit all the time and they don't need anything. Just because life is boring. They don't have a trade skill. They don't do anything. They don't create anything. They're just sitting in the audience waiting for the next television show to come on, right? I mention this because this is the fabric of which, this is just a tiny glimpse into the fabric of what we're dealing with when we try to make society kind of a homogeneous single frequency. It's going to take a long, long time to do this, right? No one ever imagined, I don't think, 15 years ago that there'd be a billionaire out there who lies about his wealth who was going to be funding the sort of social destruction of the mind for various regions of the world, creating chaos, trying to get the United States of America into a revolution, which will then, provide the excuse to crash the economy. There's no reason why America should encounter any major financial catastrophe. Even if Los Angeles was liquefied with an earthquake, that shouldn't affect the rest of the 50 states. Big hurricane could destroy a big part of the coast. We should still be able to hang on to our financial sovereignty, right? Europe can get into a gigantic war with all these terrorist cells that are now moving in on a daily basis, and we should still be okay over here. But only if we get our shit together and become more strategically self-sufficient. So in closing, let's talk about one sort of course of action, because the big question is, you, in a typical presentation where you're pitching something, and I'm really not trying to pitch anything, but let's wake the hell up here. I'm trying to pitch a different perspective. The question is, when you see people get violent from a very small sect of ignorant human beings that are terrified of life and therefore scapegoating anything they possibly can to say, this is why I don't have a job. It's not because I don't have any education or willpower. It's because there's a man I don't like in office, right? Probably the most scientifically pathetic fucking mindset you could possibly ever have, right? Wishing that the world would crash and burn so at least everyone else is suffering like you, like the old Vogons in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Just had an unhappy love affair, and I don't see why anyone else should have a good time. What they're trying to incite is violence, death. They want people in the United States, or I should say, George Soros wants people to die in America by the millions and millions and millions. The higher the number, the more happy that guy will be. The more that it affects our economy, since he has put a put option on all the stocks of any significance in America and all the stocks of any significance in Europe. If Europe goes into a gigantic war with the Muslim invasion that he is paying for, and if we can just get, the Antifa against the Republicans or whatever, which is the facade, the fake war that's being incubated here, he'll love it. The devil wins, to put it one way or another. One of the magic bullet sayings that came out of doing MK Ultra Radio in this show was a saying I came up with, which is, research nothing, know everything. That is your average protester today. And quite frankly, it's been the protest that I've ever seen my entire lifetime. I think way back in season 1, I talked about a protest I saw on television against nuclear power. And there was a little kid with his crunchy old dad, who looked like his fucking grandfather, out there, and he was protesting against nuclear power. And obviously the guy from the news station just walked up to the kid and said, "What are you doing here?" "I'm against nuclear power. I like turtles." And, oh gosh, maybe I was intelligence shaming there. And he said, "Well, just tell me, why is nuclear power bad?" Kid had nothing. Nothing. But he's holding a sign out there, right? Manipulated by his old man. And I'm not saying nuclear power is the way to go, right? But you can't, I think, protest effectively if you don't have your facts straight. And that's the name of the game in America. Now, there's also false flags that go on constantly. There's a lot of evidence that Charlottesville had a lot of shenanigans going on with the cops being told to leave. Pigeonholing the protest group. And by the way, the protest was the right wing, or I should say right wing, The entire protest was, and the petition and the filing with the city to have the protest was a former Obama executive and former CNN employee who's known as a leftist, filed the permit so that these KKK guys or whatever could do that whole thing in Charlottesville. Isn't that amazing? And they made him go down a street that's a one-way street, so they had half the protesters that showed up to do their little, protest of taking down the statue, saying don't do it. They're cornered in this cul-de-sac at the end of the road, and then they let these violent Antifa people come in, with baseball bats with spikes on the end because they saw Walking Dead and think that's fucking cool. Bricks all knocked into pieces inside bed sheets. I mean, they were ready to get into a physical fight. But the left organized both sides of this game. Half the people arrived, then the Antifa people arrived, and as soon as the Antifa came in on that group of folks, and they knew it was a one-way street, the cops left because they were supposed to leave to make sure that violence ensued. And then this guy comes out of fucking nowhere in some car with a blacked-out windshield. No one ever filmed the guy they caught in that car. They just caught him later off camera. Every single cop car has a camera in the front, right? I haven't seen that footage. The one way that you can make this thing end is to make sure that if you are part of the other group of people that aren't these Antifa folks, social justice warrior folks, if you're not part of that group, let's say you're a white supremacist, let's just say, which coming from the Midwest that's a dying group of people, man. That has been dying off since I was a little kid, man. Don't protest anything. Stay out of it. Let them show up by themselves. Right? Your protest to keep a statue up isn't going to change shit. Act outside of a protest. Because if you show up, and in fact, if you say we're never going to show up, and people show up, then we know that someone's acting both sides of the fence. Russell Brand, who's a super intelligent guy, but I think he's easily... the problem with him, and I don't know him personally or anything, but I just think he's too impressionable. But he said something very intelligent in his book about revolution or whatever it was, that he didn't think protesting really helped. He doesn't think it works, and I think he was completely correct. The world has changed. The internet makes physical protesting a useless gesture. So let's let them take their days off work. Let's let them burn up their vacations so that we don't have to fucking see them when we're in Hawaii, because they don't have any vacation. They can barely pay their rent because they're out protesting. Just let them burn up all their cash. Getting $25 a day to go protest because they answered a MoveOn.org Craigslist ad to go protest. Let them do it. But just don't show up. Don't show up to counteract them. If you're a Trump supporter, don't show up. If you're you say you hate Trump, but you don't like something else they're protesting about, don't show up. Let them be the only people who show up. For those of you who follow Milo, you'll understand that that's not that easy. The Berkeley thing was just Milo coming to speak and people trying to come and listen to them, and they basically beat up their own facility. Again, they're tough guys with masks on their faces, right? It's a little more complicated than that, but we can take a big chunk of their entire thing and just diffuse it. At my smoke lounge, we have this sort of consciousness that comes on, and it's really interesting. When the random guys walk in the door and discover the place, they're a little cautious because sometimes we're playing things on the TV that are analyzing what I'm talking about on this show. That's how I see a lot of the material that I talk about on the show. And they're nervous. They're nervous about acknowledging that the emperor has no clothes on because they have been surrounded on TV, okay, with people who think that he does. People who are in self-denial. People who are double-speaking themselves. And I'll tell you, you should see their face once they realize they're in a room full of people that have their heads out of their asses. And no one in the room is extreme right. No one definitely is extreme left. We're sort of right in the middle. We just want a beautiful world for everyone. And these guys start talking. And you could see that they have been hurting and that they've been locked in a cage because they've allowed the pressures of media to make them feel like that they're the only person in the goddamn world that thinks for humanity. They're not racists, right? And the fun thing is that we have all races in our lounge. And so we get to ask questions, well, what do Chinese people think of this? What do Indian people think of this? What do Arabs think of this? They're all there in our place. And it's just some beautiful, lucid conversations going on. And that's what I'm trying to stimulate on this show. So I hope you feel me on this one. Obviously, this is very controversial. I typically try to lean away from this kind of stuff. One, because I get emotional, as you can tell. I've said this a couple times on different episodes from season 1 all the way up, but I want to reiterate right now so that we can take away something very positive from this conversation. 99.9%, carry the 9, quite a few decimal places, of humanity is peaceful, calm, wants no trouble with another human being, has no aggressive gene to commit genocide, to really exploit their own perception of the have and have-nots. But the media creates narratives out of thin air. Remember the Russian collusion thing? They do it to sell ads, to make money. They're profiting off of the undermining of humanity. At times they will have victories, and they convince a bunch of college students to join these groups and be militant, to destroy other people's lives. I will say, for those of you, I don't think anyone's doing this shit watching this show, but if you've ever done it or you've ever seen it done and you've been victimized by it, I'll say this much. The older that you get, the more you understand karma. And I will say, to the degree you hurt another human being in this world, you've got some shit coming your way, baby. And it's probably only diffused out of your impending fucking doom if you can make penance and apologize and fix what you broke. And I actually think you have to fix it more than you broke it, because let's say this listener of ours that got fired. Let's say that some of the people in that group felt bad after a while and they went and got him the job again. They got to do more than just that to not suffer the slings and arrows of karma. Karma is unforgiving. Karma is a constant of the universe. But let me tell you the little trick that I've told a couple times on the show so you understand it. For those of you who are suffering because of someone else's deeds against you, and you know that you were well within your rights to do what you did, you weren't hurting anyone else, you were just strictly the victim of something else. The karma comes for those who did it. But the catch is the following. It doesn't happen when you want it to happen, and it doesn't happen often the way that you would like it to happen to them. For those of you who have been victimized by folks that you have no knowledge of, you don't know who they are, they're cowards. Karma is coming for them. And karma is more strategic and more thorough than anything that you and I could ever conceive in our own reactionary mode. Like when you're hurt by someone, you dream up a bunch of ways to get back at people. And you might dream up some extreme shit in your brain, right? And then you'll calm down and you'll say, I don't want that negativity in my system. The beautiful thing is that as long as you can survive and walk away, karma takes care of everything. It does. I think it is a principle of the universe because of the law of attraction. The law of attraction is the single one policing force of common law. When you do harm to someone else, either to get ahead or just to be a dick or because you lost your fucking mind for a little while, you have sent the beacon out to the universe that destruction is what you're interested in. Evil is what you are loyal to. And it's coming for you, baby. It's coming. So think real hard about how much you need to personally punish other people for what they've done. And for those who've been victims, a couple things. One, lay back in your bed tonight, Take a big, giant, beautiful breath and exhale, and let the grin just climb on your face. Because you don't need to know who these people were. They have one curse, okay, that is upon them that cannot be removed, which is, it's a two-factor fold. One, they get to wake up being who they are every single day, and nothing changes that but them. So an asshole wakes up an asshole every single day. No matter how much they can reach out and touch you and hurt you, you get to wake up a righteous person. They have to wake up an asshole. And the other thing is they've been stamped by karma. There's an identity, little barcode on them. And karma's coming, right? It's just swimming like a serpent through the universe. And it will strike them. And it will correct them. And you might think that, people like Jimmy Savile, who's a child trafficker for the royalty of Britain and all the parliament and all these people, he delivered children to these people, and he dies without being prosecuted, right? All right. So maybe in a really extreme case, someone gets to exit this world without getting what you would call karma. But I think we've had enough near-death experiences by people to understand that there is quite a lucid world on the other side of this life. That our transcended form isn't necessarily wiped clean of its responsibilities. Who knows what happens? Forget fire and brimstone and hell and all that bullshit. But it's the equivalent. It's the equivalent. Does that mean we let, people go without any persecution? We don't put people in jail? We don't take out pedophiles? Absolutely not. We have to manage this world as well. We are responsible for this world. And I think for the very first time in a couple centuries, we've now changed our mind about letting everything happen to us incidentally and laissez-faire. Well, geez, the world sucks and then you die. I think we're done with that little saying, that little catchphrase. I think we're willing to take responsibility for what's going on. It's a slow crawl at first, right? When there's a paradigm shift in society, we take a long time to harmonize into the masses. There's a lot of problems that we don't have solutions for. Racism is sort of this, this cheap label on what really amounts to cultural differences. A person's skin color doesn't mean anything, really. It's just a color. Culturally, if a group of people have a methodology of living that another culture refuses to accept, such as children being wives of old men, most of society frowns on that. But there's a giant portion of the world that thinks that that's okay. And what's weird about it, of course, in the doublespeak world that we live in, you have laws in Europe that say you can't do that. It's considered statutory rape. America has the same exact thing. I think most modern first world countries have statutory rape limits. You're not allowed to have sex with people under a certain age. If you're in America, if you're 17 and under, probably, 15 to 17, you guys can start having sex in this country, and the law's not going to step in necessarily. The second you cross 18 and you have sex with that 16-year-old, you're a rapist. Doesn't matter if she gives you consent or not. Now, I think there's some states in America that loosen up around 16. But over the years, that age has risen, right? Up to 18. But we're supposed to be bringing people into these first world countries that believe completely the opposite. An 80-year-old man can have sex with a 7-year-old girl, as the case proved out in Germany. Well, Germany has statutory rape laws as well. But for whatever reason, they're now softening pedophilia, human trafficking, sex slavery, to feel intellectual. I don't know a more unequivocal definition of complete fucking ignorance and stupidity than that. And yet that's sort of what the 21st century's turned into currently. For those of you who are Europeans who feel like I'm preaching to the choir, well, then you got a lot of conversations to have in your fellow Europeans to make sure that you just compare those two things. Say, look, don't we think that having sex with children is bad? Yes, oh yes, yeah. Oui. Okay, then why are we allowing this group of people to come in who are bringing their child brides in? How can it suddenly become legal just because there's a cultural, norm that's being imported into our country? See how that goes. See how that goes, because that little girl is a human being. That little girl has inherited, regardless of what fucked up culture man has created in one sector of society, she has the inalienable right to not be harmed by another human being. Next time you're out in public, do me this little piece of homework favor for yourself. Next time you see a bunch of little kids at a restaurant, and you see a little girl that's around 6, 7 years old with their tiny little petite bodies, I want you to search in the room for the biggest guy in that room, especially if you're in public. Some big 6'5" burly motherfucker. Don't blame this guy. You're just picking out his physique, right? But now imagine someone like that mounting this child. We don't need to go any further than that, right? But that's what the European Union is institutionalizing in a legal way right now in 2017. You want to tell me that that organization should exist? I will beg to differ. All right? They know they can't pull that shit in America. They know they won't. We own a fuckload of guns, and we are part of the slice of humanity that still eats meat, that still has aggression against evil. My European brothers and sisters, don't lose your humanity to the Prussian education system. Don't let this stuff grow. Because any of you have ever had offspring, and they're still alive, and they're going to have offspring, well, did you want to take care of your grandkids when they're happy? Or did you want to take care of your grandkids because the German police said it was okay that the guy from the sanctuary city abducted your child, maybe even brainwashed her to think that she's part of something because she doesn't like to go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, but she's a sex slave somewhere in some tent or some fucking $5 million penthouse they handed out to these people. Your world is your world and their world is their world. Now, if you want to be intellectual and say, well, people are different, well, okay, fine. You do it in your country, but in this country, it ain't happening. All right? All right, I think that's it. I won't make these very often, but this is something that just boiled up in me prior to hearing about our listener being attacked by these individuals. We need to protect each other from this lunacy. For any of you who have the time and the due diligence to help defend people who have been victims of this stuff, please step up to the plate. If you're an attorney or you're married to one or you know one and you know that they're not down with this, then please inspire them to do some pro bono defense work for people that are victimized by this kind of stuff. If you're in press, write about this kind of stuff. You're a blogger, blog about this kind of stuff. They're talking, why don't we talk? Right? DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. There's video if you're on audio, audio if you're on video. Your video options are YouTube.com and vid.me. Your audio is iTunes, Google Play, or just go to DeepThoughtsRadio.com with your mobile device and click on the RSS feed. There's a Patreon account on the DeepThoughtsRadio.com. There's also a locked Facebook group that you're welcome to join. We've had a lot of spirited conversations recently. The Facebook group, just so you guys know, it's probably about 2/3 your posts, 1/3 my posts. It's really to provide a proxy so that we can kind of talk together. We've had some recent debates about flat Earth versus round Earth. If you get all flustered, go see the episode on our differences so that you can kind of be more pliable with people who disagree with you. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over.